Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm calling the meeting to order. Before we begin with our roll call, I'd like to ask our City Attorney Keith Lemire to report on our closed session item.
Sure, Madam Mayor. This is a report from coming out of the closed session special meeting that occurred just prior to this meeting. The board met in closed session with our labor negotiator, Mark Lazaretto, and attorneys Nate Kowalski and Steve Filarski regarding negotiations involving the Firefighters Association. After receiving a report from the negotiators, no reportable action took place. Madam Mayor, that concludes the report.
Thank you. Okay, roll call, please.
Mayor Menchaca?
Here.
Vice Mayor Liao?
Here.
Councilmember Ding?
Here.
Councilmember Harrington?
Here.
Councilmember Pu?
Here.
Okay. Tonight's meeting is live streamed on cable channel 3 and our online platforms. Please email all public comments to cityclerk@sgch.org no later than the time the item is considered by the council tonight. Comments received after items have been considered will be read into record. Comments will be read for up to 3 minutes each. Okay, next item.
Public comment. Pursuant to the provisions of the Government Code, this is the time provided for members of the public to address the City Council regarding matters on this agenda. And we have 3 comments this evening. The first is from Doug Richter and reads as follows. I concur 100% with the article entitled, Why is San Gabriel City Hall Subsidizing the Chamber of Commerce, published by coloradoboulevard.net, and therefore the city should not subsidize the Chamber of Commerce. Thus, please make sure the city cuts this item out of its budget tonight and save us taxpayers almost $32,000. And then the link to the article is listed. The next comment is from Senya Lubisic, Chair of the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resources Commission of 116 North Delmar Avenue, and reads as follows. I would like to convey to Council how important it is to protect funding for a historic context statement. Failure to bring an RFP before the Commission meant that previously dedicated funds were not allocated to the project. We have been making progress with Mark Gallatin in his temporary role, and it is important that we continue to move on this project. We did submit our application for certified local government status at the end of last year, which, when approved, will make us eligible for state grants. It would be a double loss to cut any opportunity to leverage future grant funds from our city budget. Please protect preservation as we find our way forward. The next comment is from Chuck Myers of 404 Garona Avenue. I do not agree with postponing the historic preservation budget amount of $40,000. It would appeal to me our city council has little or no intention of pursuing implementation of the historic preservation ordinance. We are rapidly approaching the 3rd anniversary passage of the ordinance. We have yet to engage a firm for completion of the historical context report. We started out being a flagship, giving the LA Conservancy said our ordinance was the best of its kind to date. I would have to opine, based on our experience, the flagship is sinking in the distance. That concludes the comments received so far.
Okay, thank you. So our next item will be our study session. And the presentation will be made by Management Specialist Julia James.
Thank you, Mayor. If I can just say a couple of quick words before I turn it over to Ms. James.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. First, to introduce Julia, since this is the first time you're all virtually meeting her, we brought Julia on board right after the first of the year to help us out with Linda Tang being out for several months on leave. And as you all know, Linda plays a key role in putting together the budget. And without her, we would not be able to present the budget for you today. So Julia has been phenomenal. She's a retired finance director from cities like Fullerton and Southgate. And those two cities are important because they have weathered storms that we're looking at having to weather. So Julia has been through this kind of thing before, as has Ken Louie, our interim finance director. So between the two of them, I feel like we're in great hands in presenting the council and the community with a budget that is realistic and based on, I think, conservative but realistic numbers. I also wanted to thank the entire staff, all of the managers and the directors especially, who played a role in creating a budget that we're presenting for you to consider tonight on a overall level. The directors were very, very cooperative in the cuts that we're presenting to you tonight, in trying to come up with creative ways to balance the budget while still maintaining as many services as possible, given our new fiscal reality. So I have to give my kudos to all of them for stepping up to the plate yet again, as they did last year, and to all of the managers who support them. So with that, I send a lot of kudos and I'm grateful. Again, kind of talking about the way we did last year, the budget you're presented with is balanced. We actually are projecting putting some money, as Julia will talk about, we're putting some money into our general fund deficit balance. And so if things go as we plan, we will be further along in our efforts to come out of that negative general fund reserve balance. It's balanced, but it's not sustainable. There, as Julia will tell you, there are several areas where we can't go, years and years of doing this, because deferred maintenance and replenishing some of our funds can't be on the long term. But for the next year or so, we are in a better spot and have an ability to continue on. And finally, before I'm sorry, two more things. One, the Mission Playhouse. Julia will talk about that a little bit, but I intend for the council to have a discussion sometime between now and the beginning of summer on the Mission Playhouse. That is fully funded in the budget, but with all of the revenues and expenditures. But I think we can all agree, especially based on what we've heard today, that we're not opening as a county anytime in the next few months in order to have the kinds of events that we're going to have at the Mission Playhouse. So we'll have to do some adjusting with that part of the budget, because we know that starting July 1, we won't be able to turn the spigot on and have a full year of program. So we'll have to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the Mission Playhouse budget. But Julia is going to talk a bit about that tonight and hopefully tee that up for a bigger discussion into the future. And then I wanted to end with some appreciation for the voters in San Gabriel, because without Measure SG being successful, we would be looking at making draconian cuts. I know you've heard communities like Santa Monica and Los Angeles and other what I'll call destination communities, because they are built almost entirely upon tourism and the kind of revenues that come from people visiting their communities. Those communities are having to make incredible cuts that will be service level adjustments. We have made cuts over the last several years, and we're not funding our street improvements and other things to the level they should be, as you all know. But because we have a new revenue source that we haven't grown into, we're able to use that new revenue source as a way to temporarily have us a balanced budget. And then as the years go by and we recover, that will do what we told the taxpayers of San Gabriel. It will help to start to pave the streets. It will help to start to add programs, and it will help to protect the city public safety employees and the rest of the employees. But without that now, we would be looking at incredible service level cuts that would be very difficult for the council to make, and I believe very difficult for the community to receive. So I can't underscore the incredible help that has been in this year. So with that, I will turn it over to Julia, and she is going to talk about in a little more detail the budget and how we got to where we are today. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council, and good evening, staff. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and present to you the proposed budget for fiscal year 2021. This is going to be, I'm sorry, Jonathan, can you provide slide 1, please? And this will be a very high-level overview. And what staff plans to do is present to you in the next 1 to 2 weeks a more detailed version so that you'll know exactly what is in the budget for next year. But tonight we're just going to hit the highlights. So with that, let's go to page 2, slide 2. And we are presenting to you a budget overview. We will be hitting on the general fund, our revenues, expenditures. We'll talk about the fund balance. Our other funds, our internal service and special revenue funds. We'll talk about proposed staffing changes, our capital improvement program, and finally, we'll discuss what the next steps will be. Slide 3, please. So let's talk about our year in review. We had some pretty unusual things happen for a city this year. We began the year with a general fund deficit of 1.8 million. We did adopt in 1920 a balanced budget. And then we learned that the state was going to be coming in and conducting an audit. We were successful in passing the the local sales tax measure, Measure SG. Then COVID-19 hit, establishing restrictions and really basically shutting down the economy for the next several months. So with that, it will impact our operations for the next few months, we anticipate. And with that, we made some adjustments to what would normally be our budget. But we do propose to end the year with about $1 million more than we had anticipated ending the year. Now, we'll still be projected to be in a negative fund balance, but the adopted budget showed a year-end fund balance of an estimated 1.7 million deficit. We're estimating that it'll be more like 800,000 deficit. That's because we've had several savings this year from vacancies in positions and just operations basically going a lot slower and some even shutting down due to the COVID environment. So fortunately, we should be able to bring the general fund balance closer to being in the black in the next year. Slide 4, please. So last year, you may recall that the City Council adopted a resolution for fiscal sustainability. And in that, it contains a list of guiding principles that we follow in putting our budget together. And we are reviewing those tonight just to remind you of what goes into our consideration as we put the budget together. It's our intent to develop and maintain a balanced city budget, to build and maintain prudent reserves, to follow the fund balance policy that was also adopted last year, and we will talk more about that as well, to base the budget on realistic estimates, both revenues and expenditures, to sustain a sufficient and quality level of service at all times, and to provide timely fiscal reports to the City Council. Slide 5. So here we have an overview of the total city proposed budget. We show general funds of 41.6 million or 61% of the total city budget. Our special revenue funds total 22.5 million or 32% of the total budget. Our internal service funds total 5.25 or 7%. 5.25 million or 7% of the total city budget, for a total of $69,369,000. And then we'll also cover the overview of the CIP, which adds another 6.2 million to our total budget of $75.5 million. Slide 6. So now we'll talk about the general fund, and we'll go to slide 7. So again, as I mentioned previously, we had estimated, the adopted budget in 1920 started the year with a negative 1.8 million general fund deficit. We had revenues of we adopted revenues of 32.7 million. We had transfers in of nearly 9 million. General fund expenditures of 40.8 million. Transfers out of 995 million. And we were ending the year with a 1.9 million deficit. Now that's 73,000 more than what we adopted the year with. And that was because we had some carryovers from the previous year on some projects that automatically got transferred over, but we are not anticipating actually spending that money. So if we go to column 2, you'll see where we estimate actually ending the current fiscal year. Our revenues are going to be a bit lower, and we'll get into a little more detail on how we estimated those. But because of the coronavirus and the restrictions in place, we don't estimate getting our full revenues by the end of June. We will get the transfers in from the retirement fund. Our general fund expenditures, we anticipate being down a few million. As I mentioned previously, we have some vacancies, we have some things that didn't get done, and we have money that didn't get spent. So we anticipate having some savings there. And with that, we estimate ending the year at a negative 830,000, which is about $1 million more to the good than what we had originally anticipated. So then going over to the far column, our proposed 2021 budget starts with the 830,000 deficit. We have estimated revenues of 32,719,000, which, if you notice, is almost as much as what our proposed fiscal year 1920 budget was. And that's fortunately due to the addition of the local sales tax that was just passed in March. Our retirement transfer will come up a little bit to 9.8. We'll talk a little bit more about what goes into that in the next few slides. Our estimated expenditures are 41.339. That's up roughly about $500,000 more than what we adopted last year, and that is, we'll cover that. That is one of the additions to the budget that we will discuss in a future slide. Our transfers out will be reduced to 250,000. We will discuss that as well. But we estimate ending the fund balance at the end of June 2021 at 109 million to the good. So we'll actually hopefully be in the black if everything turns out the way that we estimate that it will. Now, again, we had to estimate based on rather unusual conditions that we're not used to. So we do say that this right now is our very best estimate, but we will continue to monitor throughout the coming months. And as the economy starts to reopen again, we'll be able to adjust accordingly, and we'll come back to council with adjustments. Slide 8, please. So this gives you more of an idea of what our general fund revenue looks like. And I know it's a lot of numbers, but if you follow along with me in column 1, where we adopted the budget in 2019-20, we had budgeted an estimated 41.7 million in revenues for the general fund. And you'll notice that most of that is tax revenue, property sales, TOT, UUT. And we do estimate being down a little bit. In the second column, you'll notice that we estimate about just under 40 million coming in at the end of the year. And again, we estimate that sales tax will be down a little bit, transient occupancy tax, some of our services that charge for the services that we provide are on hold, so that becomes affected too. But we do end up estimating for the next fiscal year, 2021, to come back and actually be a little bit ahead of where we adopted the budget last year. And again, that is because of our new sales tax. So we show taxes increasing by about 5% next year. Most of that is due to property tax. We did estimate that our sales, again, and transfer and occupancy will be down a little bit, but we do estimate that property tax will remain strong. Our intergovernmental revenues will be reduced. These are revenues that we get from other government agencies, and they just vary from year to year depending on the situation. If we have, if we provide some services like mutual aid in the fire department, and then we get reimbursed from the government, that's where that money goes. And we don't anticipate much coming in next year because we don't really have much hanging out there right now. Our licenses and permits, we estimate being down a little bit from the previous year. And that is because in last fiscal year, we increased this revenue stream because of all the building permits that were out there. There was about a $300,000 increase to building permits in 1920 that we don't anticipate in 2021. So that's why that's down. Our fines and forfeitures we show going up a little bit. And that is due to the parking. We do anticipate the possibility of the overnight parking program increasing, so we built a little bit in there. If that actually does end up getting amended, we can go back and amend that revenue stream later, but we did anticipate that that would come up a little bit next year. Our use of money and property will stay relatively flat. That's our rental revenue. Our fees for charges and services, we anticipate going down just a little bit, and that's because of the slower start to the year because of the COVID restrictions. And our other revenue is down 72%, down to $306,000 next year. That's a significant drop, but that's because we are not exchanging Prop A funds next year. And in 1920, that was worth $1 million. So that's why the significant decrease there. We will be able to do that again in the following fiscal year, but we only do that every 2 years. And then finally, our transfers in will be going up, and those transfers come from the retirement fund. And we'll talk about that a little more in the coming slides. So with that, if we can go to slide 9. So again, I spoke about the challenges from the economic uncertainty of the post-COVID-19 period. We, again, just looked at trends. We followed what was going on countywide and looked at what the city of San Gabriel had out there in the way of businesses and operations, and made our very best assumptions. We think that they're fairly good estimates, but again, we will be monitoring those closely, and if we need to adjust, we will certainly be coming back and seeking council approval for that. Again, our consumer-based revenues, sales and transient occupancy taxes will be the biggest hits because people are not out there spending money and they're not staying in hotels. So we hope that it won't be as bad as what we've estimated. We think that our estimates are very conservative. We do believe that it may actually be a little better than what we projected, but we wanted to be conservative. So we'll see how that goes. Our other revenues will be affected to a lesser degree, somewhat, but not as much. And, you know, again, our taxes are our main revenue base, so they're the ones that carry the most weight in the general fund. Now, normally we'll take the fee resolution to council in June along with the budget. We decided not to do that this year because everybody has been hit so hard with the economic shutdown. We didn't want to come back and hit them again with fee increases. So what we're proposing to do is postpone that. We have budgeted for a fee study in this next year's budget. So we can go back, look at what we're charging, try to get everything in line, and come back either later in the fiscal year or the following fiscal year with recommended fee increases at that time. And again, We will know a little bit better once the restrictions are lifted, so we will come back and make adjustments as needed. Slide 10, please. So the assumptions we used in putting the general fund revenues together was that property taxes seem to be coming in strong. They have not yet been affected by the COVID restrictions, and we don't anticipate them to be affected by that. We estimate 2.8 million coming in from the new sales tax. And again, that pretty much offsets any reductions that we were going to have to budget in our revenues. Again, as I mentioned before, no property exchange next year. And our transfers in from the retirement fund, which are used to cover our retirement costs to PERS, have an additional 250,000 in there. We noticed that there was some residual fund balance from prior years. And we thought we would add 250,000 to the transfer in to make a one-time contribution to the OPEB trust. So if it weren't for COVID-19, we estimated that our revenues would have been at least 45 million in the general fund next year. So they're still down about 2.5 million, but that gives you an idea of how we'll look in future years. We just had to be very, very conservative this year in our
Julia has frozen.
expenditures so that we could balance the budget. And with that, we'll go to slide 11. We have the city council's budget at 258,000. The administration and city attorney budgets at 974,000. City clerk at 667,000. Finance at 1.674 million. Human resources at 1.17 million. Non-departmental at 1.8 million. Police at 15.6 million. Fire at almost 7 million. Community development at 3 million. Public works at 4.85. And community services at 1.5 million. And a couple of things to note, the significant reduction in the city clerk's budget was due to the fact that during fiscal year 1920, we had an election that was budgeted in there, and we are not having an election in this fiscal year. The reduction in the finance department is due to 2 unfunded positions. The increase in human resources is because we budgeted an additional 500,000 for the Flora settlement next year. So that's a one-time boost. We had a reduction in non-departmental due to a vacancy factor that was budgeted, and we will be discussing that more in detail later. We had 1 unfunded position in community development for the reduction there. And then the public works department was reduced because we shifted some of the costs over into special revenue funds, which we will also discuss in detail later. And with that, we'll move to slide 12. So our breakdown by category shows in the general fund that we have 30.5 million budgeted in personnel costs, which is about 74% of our total budget. Our operating budget is 10,860,000, which is down 98,000 from last year and accounts for 26% of the total budget. Our transfers out are down by 433,000 over last year. And our transfers out to capital projects are down by 312,000 because we will not have any next year coming out of the general fund. So our total general fund budget is 41.6 million. And again, we're down about 216,000. And as Mark mentioned, that's due primarily to all the work that all the department heads did in identifying areas to save in each of their budgets. And we'll move to slide 13. So expenditure highlights include increases to employee compensation, where there were no increases in cost of living. We still had step increases and increases in benefits. to the tune of about 1.46 million. To offset that, to ensure we had a balanced budget, we identified 1.7 million in reductions, including unfunding a senior NIS officer, an IT specialist, and a management analyst position. We budgeted a vacancy factor, assuming a 6-month delay in filling positions. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not going to fill them. It just means that we anticipate by the time the COVID lifts and we're able to start recruiting and testing and interviewing for positions, that it's probably going to take 6 months anyway. So we went ahead and budgeted that savings into the non-departmental division just to as a placeholder. We reduced staff development training in most of the departments. We reduced the transfer out to Mission Playhouse, which we will talk about later. And we, again, transferred several eligible costs from the Public Works Department to special revenue funds. Slide 14. There were some additions to the budget as well. Again, the $500,000 settlement amount. We have the contribution to OPEB of $250,000 coming from the retirement fund. We needed to increase the animal control contract. We don't know exactly what it'll be yet, but we did hear that it would be about 32% increase. So we estimated by $86,000. Consultant fees, we've added into administration, $15,000 for a strategic plan study and $30,000 into finance for a fee study. And then we've added debt service payments in anticipation of lease purchasing some badly needed vehicles throughout the city, including 3 police vehicles and 1 motorcycle, 1 fire rescue ambulance, and 1 public works utility truck, which have been delayed for several years and badly in need of replacement. We only budgeted 6 months worth of debt service payments because we don't anticipate purchasing the vehicles until the second half of the year, mainly because the police vehicles are on back order and don't anticipate being able to purchase those until November or December of this year. So that means that next year we will have the additional 6 months of cost. So those will go up the following fiscal year. Slide 15. So then we get to our general fund balance, and the council will recall adopting the fund balance policy back in May of 19, which established a target of achieving a 17% fund balance by June of 2028. This means, and there was also included in that policy a scale for accomplishing that target, which was a 3% reserve by June 30 of 2021, which meant that we would have had to end next fiscal year with a balance of $1,275,000. Now, that might have been possible without COVID-19, but because of COVID-19, we are unfortunately delayed in that. So we will look at coming back to council after budget adoption to possibly consider revising the fund balance policy and delaying that target year by 1, or other ideas. So slide 16, if the council wanted to consider some additional savings to increase the general fund balance reserve earlier, we do have a couple of options. The largest one being the positions that we don't anticipate filling for 6 months. We had budgeted a vacancy factor of just under $1 million. And this includes positions, 3 positions for vacant positions, I should say, in community development, 1 vacant position in finance, 3 in police, 1 in human services, 2 in Mission Playhouse, 6 in fire, and 4 in public works, although the ones in public works are not general funded. So this would, if considering this means that the positions would not go away. They would just be frozen for a year, and we would not begin recruitment for those until the following fiscal year. That would save an additional $911,000 on top of the $911,000 that we already have budgeted. Slide 17. Other smaller things that we could consider doing are to suspend community events for 1 year. We already know that we're not going to be able to start with the summer events as quickly as we had hoped. But we have a minimum $150,000 budgeted in the non-departmental fund or department. That does not include staff time, so it's really a minimal cost of estimate of providing these events, but it is a little bit. We have the Chamber of Commerce membership budgeted at $31,680, which we could consider suspending. Suspending work on or postponing the work on the historic preservation ordinance of $40,000. Worst case scenario, and we're not recommending it, but we could always draw from the OPEB trust to pay for our retiree health insurance. Slide 18. Now we're going to talk about our other funds, which are special revenue and internal service funds. So if we go to slide 19, we'll start with the internal service funds. We have 2 internal service funds. The Fleet Services Fund is budgeted at $1,586,000 next year. That's an increase of $269,000. That is funded 82% by transfers from the general fund, and that includes vehicle maintenance and vehicle replacement costs. The reason for the increase is primarily for the lease purchase of these vehicles that I mentioned earlier. We have a budgeted amount in the general fund in vehicle replacement costs, which gets allocated over and into the internal service fund, and then the lease payments will come out of that fund. The risk management fund is budgeted at $3,667,000 next year, or an increase of $187,000, of which 87% is funded by the general fund. And the increase on that is due to insurance premiums going up, primarily workers' comp and property insurance. With that, we go to slide 20. And I think I already covered this. Again, the increase in fleet services is the lease purchase of the vehicles, and increase in risk management is because of insurance premiums. So we'll go to slide 21. We have several special revenue funds, and the types of funds they provide for are transportation. We have gas tax, Prop C, road maintenance, Measures MR, and TDA. We have nearly 5.8 million budgeted in those types of funds. Our public safety funds, OTS and supplemental law enforcement, asset forfeiture, we have 200,000 budgeted there next year. Community service funds, Mission Playhouse, CDBG, community services activity, and Prop A, they provide services to the public. $2,332,000. Utility funds such as sewer, street lighting, stormwater, and waste management are nearly $3 million. And our other funds, development impact, other grants, and retirement funds total $10.5 million. Slide 22, please. So you'll notice in this next graph that the majority of costs, if you take out the retirement fund, which is the operating transfers out, and take that out of the mix, and you'll notice that most of the costs of the special revenue funds go towards the special projects, the capital projects. That's because we get a lot of grant funds. We generate a lot of funds that pay for infrastructure improvements. And so in total, we have $22.5 million in special revenue funds budgeted next year. And go to slide 23. I'll just give you some of the highlights, some of the changes. The retirement fund, which increases every year at the rate the property taxes do, covers, that is transferred primarily into the general fund to cover retirement costs to PERS. And again, as mentioned previously, we're adding an additional $250,000 to make a one-time contribution to the OPEB trust next year. The gas tax fund, we've moved, this is one of the funds that we've moved a lot of general fund costs over into to relieve some of the general fund obligations. And this is all for street division and street maintenance projects. We've also created a new stormwater fund next year due to the county's Measure W Clean Water Act. We anticipate receiving about $400,000 next year from the county for these projects, and we were able to then transfer $175,000 that was previously budgeted in the general fund over into this new fund. Slide 24. Then we get to the Mission Playhouse, and as we discussed, the Mission Playhouse has its operations budgeted at 100% next year. About half of the revenue that they receive is generated from productions, so it funds the production portion of the budget, which is basically half of their total annual budget. The rest of it is subsidized by the general fund, which usually will transfer the necessary amount to make the Mission Playhouse Fund whole. But this has come at great expense to the general fund over the years. And with the state audit coming in, we need to show the state that we can build up our general fund and meet the obligations as laid out in our fund balance policy. So we need to right now make the general fund the priority. We are transferring some money into the Mission Playhouse, but it won't be the full complement. So the Mission Playhouse fund balance will go farther into the red next year. But we will come back after the budget adoption to discuss with council options on what we can do to maybe find some additional revenues for the Mission Playhouse, because we certainly want to keep it. So with that, we will turn to slide 25, 26, please. And we'll briefly talk about proposed staffing changes. Our complement of staff, in last fiscal year, we had authorized 198 positions. This year, we're adding an additional 3 positions proposed in 2021. And of those proposed positions, we are unfunding some of them just for 1 year, not eliminating, just unfunding. And with that, our complement will go back to 198. We are unfunding 1 position in administration, the management analyst, 1 position in finance, which is the IT specialist, and 1 in community development, which is the NIS officer, senior NIS officer. Public Works is actually adding 3 positions net to their budget, but those are funded by other special revenue funds. So that is why we added the positions where we would normally consider not doing that in this current environment. With that, we'll move to slide 27. And we pretty much covered that. So we will go to slide 28. So the reorganization in the Public Works Department, which does add some positions, the net cost to the general fund was 0. We are actually adding 3 maintenance workers, which will be funded by gas tax funds. They are budgeted in the general fund, but we were able to move some of the operating costs out of the general fund and into the gas tax fund because we are obligated to spend a certain amount by the state every year in the general fund before we can use gas tax funds. And every year it was always a struggle to make sure we met that obligation before spending gas tax funds. So we just moved things around to ensure that we would meet our state obligation, and the minimum balance there has to be $1,360,000, I believe, $60,000 of general fund costs on street maintenance before the gas tax will kick in. So we just shuffled some things around, but the net position is no gain, no added cost to the general fund. 2 park maintenance lead workers will be reclassified to maintenance workers as opposed to parks maintenance workers. We're going to reclassify 2 grounds worker positions also to maintenance workers. And we're going to reclassify a maintenance lead worker to sewer stormwater manager, which will be funded by sewer and waste management funds. Slide 29. And then again, this talks about the vacancy factor that we've budgeted and the number of positions in each department that it covers. We have 1 in HR, 1 in finance, 2 in Mission Playhouse, 1 in public works, 1 in community development, 6 in the fire department, and 4 in the police department. And again, we don't necessarily anticipate not filling these positions. We just assume that if we started on July 1st with the recruitment process, it would take at least 6 months to fill these positions anyway. So we thought we would go ahead and budget that vacancy factor to help out the general fund. And with that, we'll move on to slide 31, which provides just a very high-level overview of the CIP. And it contains in 2021 projects for street improvements totaling just over 2.4 million, traffic signal improvements also of 2.4 million, sewer improvements of 965,000, park improvements of 100,000, and public facility improvements of 300,000. And these, again, are simply additions to the 5-year CIP. We are still working on some projects from previous fiscal years that are being carried forward. These are the new ones being added for fiscal year 2021. With that, we will move on to the next steps. If you go to slide 33. After tonight, we will be providing a more detailed budget prior to the public hearing on June 2nd. We will have one-on-one meetings with each of the council members to review the budget so that you can ask any detailed questions that you might have. On June 2nd, we'll have the public hearing, and if the council is ready to adopt on that night, we can do that. If you need more time, we will bring it back on June 16th for adoption. And then again, as discussed previously, in July of 2020, we will come back with, or sooner, we will come back with possible revisions to the fund balance policy and the discussion on the Mission Playhouse. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and we'll open it up for any discussion and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, before we start, I just wanted to announce that the time for public comment on this item is now closed. City Clerk, please read any comments received.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have received several more comments. The first is from Senya Lubisic, an amended statement, and it does fall within the 3-minute time limit, so I will start with that one. It reads as follows. I would like to convey to council how important it is to protect funding for a historic context statement. Failure to bring an RFP before the commission meant that previously dedicated funds were not allocated to the project. We have been making progress with Mark Gallatin in his temporary role, and it is important that we continue to move on this project. We did submit our application for certified local government status at the end of last year, which, when approved, will make us eligible for state grants. It would be a double loss to cut any opportunity to leverage future grant funds from our city budget. Please understand that our commission needs a context statement to continue to move forward. It is the foundation on which future projects will build. We will need a context statement to guide a historic resources survey and inventory. Our path forward is long, but I am asking both as the chair of your Historic Preservation and Cultural Resources Commission and as a community volunteer who has spent nearly 15 years working to preserve, protect, and advocate for the historic resources in our city, that you protect our budget. If you fail to fund the commission's work, you will not only stop our forward progress that we might make, but may potentially reverse the gains that we have made. Please protect preservation as a function of public service and governance as we find our way forward. The next comment is from Isella Bowles and reads as follows. During these difficult times, this city budget should be cautiously studied. Many of you, if not all, have run political campaigns with promises to preserve, defend, and bring to fruition the historical preservation of this city. We, the people of San Gabriel, are asking the City Council to keep your promises and take your position as stewards of taxpayer dollars very seriously. Postponing the historical ordinance will not be viewed as keeping a political promise. The next comment is from Camila Lopez of 941 South Lafayette Street, a descendant of the Gabrielino Tongvo Band of Mission Indians. And it reads as follows. It has come to my attention that the city staff is recommending a cut to the Historic Preservation Commission's budget. As a 7th or more generation resident of this historic city, I strongly disagree with this recommendation. Our history needs to continue to be preserved, and I recommend the following. 1, keep funds protected for preservation. 2, allow the commission to continue to work on requirements established in the ordinance. 3, keep funds that can be used for grant applications. And 4, show the commitment to preservation that is valued by many residents of this city. The next comment is from Ashley Hernandez. To whom it may concern, my name is Ashley Hernandez and I live at 116 North Delmar Avenue in San Gabriel. I am writing to you in regards to the recommended cut to the Historic Preservation Commission's budget. I highly oppose this recommendation and strongly support protecting preservation funds. It is important to maintain the city and community's commitment to historical preservation. Protecting this funding is imperative as it helps the commission continue its work on the requirements established in the ordinance. And the final comment is from Eloy Zarate. City of San Gabriel, I am sending this message advocating to keep fully funded the Historic Preservation Commission. I am also asking for the city to continue to support the work of its commissioners, and in particular, its chairwoman, Senya Lubisic. They are close to fulfilling the first steps needed to make the city eligible for grants and other financial aid at the state level. Do not put this work on the back burner. We need to keep working and supporting these important city and community efforts to preserve the history and values of our city. And Madam Mayor, that concludes the comments received.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, so before I begin with the council questions or discussions, I just wanted to, again, kind of echo some of Mark's sentiments. I wanted to thank our city manager, Mark, and the staff for providing a balanced budget, which is a huge feat right now in light of all the economic demands that are being placed due to COVID, for reversing the deficit on the general fund. I was at 1.8 million at the beginning of the year. And again, this is the first time I think in 4 or 5 years that's been positive. And then also for including the revenue estimates using worst case scenarios. I'm not sure if you can even, that's so difficult to even do considering this is a pandemic that we've never even seen. I think it's, it will be devastating, but I appreciate the fact that the staff is conscientious about that and being as conservative as they can with the revenue estimates. I wanted to give special thanks to Greg DeVink, our Public Works Director. As many of us heard last week during his presentation, he has gone to great lengths to reorganize his department and to protect our general fund. And it has moved quite a bit of monies to the special funds. And so that has really freed up the ability for us to have a balanced budget. So, I just wanted to say that before we began. I will, let's see, I'm not sure if anybody wants to volunteer to start, but I'll start with our Vice Mayor. Lau, would you like to begin? You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And this very impressive budget report. Well, we just had a, sort of a report from our state controller. And she mentioned something, the state revenue is, we're going to lose more than 50%. And according to the governor, Newsom, last year we budgeted, $17 billion surplus. Now is 54.4 deficit. I'm talking about billions. So our city looks great. And, compared to others, I think this is really, again, very impressive. But I just don't know. Have we received the real TOT, from the hotels, at least from two, Hilton and Sheraton Hotel so far?
Mr. Vice Mayor, we cannot talk specifically about those hotels because we can't give away, trade information. But I will tell you that the TOT number that we received for the first quarter was much stronger than we thought it was going to be. So we're a little higher in that for the current fiscal year, but we took that number down to 50% for all of next year. So we have taken it to what we think is a conservative level. But as Ms. James pointed out, we are projecting that we'll backfill the fund balance deficit to the tune of almost $1 million. If we are overly optimistic on our revenues, that will give us a cushion. We will still be over in our revenues and expenditures, or even. We just won't backfill the deficit as much as we otherwise would. So I feel like we have a built-in cushion there if things don't work out, even as we think they could in a worst-case scenario.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. And another question, of course, our largest revenue for a city is the property tax. And again, I think states has concerns, even though LA County, they didn't waive, I guess everyone has to pay, but they did waive the late penalty. But as I understand, a lot of people couldn't come up with the property tax, according to state controller, and she said, well, her office is helping seniors and disabled people. The state can pay their property tax, but then it will be a lien against them. And when they die, they have to pay back to the state. So that's another question. How much property tax have we received or have we know from the county assessor office?
Well, again, we've been lucky. San Gabriel obviously is one of our biggest revenue sources is property tax. And though we anticipate if we go into an extended recession, that will hit us like everybody else, but that will be more of a delayed hit than the immediate hit we felt with sales tax and with TOT. But that being said, what we heard from the assessor's office is the tax collector collected almost 99% of the property taxes. Because the state didn't come forward and officially say that there will be a waiver on penalties, and because the assessor's office was saying that they will only do it on a case-by-case basis, enough people came forward to pay taxes. So we are going to be almost entirely whole for the current fiscal year. Now, as you said, there are some deferrals that have been proposed by the state. So that could affect our cash flow timing for next fiscal year. But we're anticipating it's going to be a slight increase next year over this year's revenues.
Good, that's good news. Another question is the Measure R. We used the Measure R in 2014 because we borrowed money from iBank, California Infrastructure Bank, for fixing the Del Mar Street. But I saw there's other revenue for major art. That's $2.365 million. I was just curious, where's that money coming from?
Julia, can you answer that one? I don't know the answer off the top of my head for that one.
Well, first of all, we do have, pardon me, well, notes here. We do have the debt service on that borrowing paid by Measure R, but we have roughly $700,000 annually that we receive in Measure R funds. We had a previous fund balance of, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was still rather significant. So we are budgeting down between the current revenue and prior fund balance. We are budgeting those funds towards various projects. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I just
So
remembered.
I don't know, maybe it's from 710
It is.
extension.
It is. I just remembered as soon as I turned it over to Julia, I remembered that money is where we're plugging the money in for the projects that we received money from the 710 extension. So that's not the whole 30+ million that we received. I'm sorry, not 30, but the several million that we received. It's what we're going to be spending for next fiscal year. It's on a reimbursement basis.
Right. So do you remember how much exactly from 710? I thought it was maybe 11 million.
I want to say 13, but Greg, do you have an exact answer?
Yeah, Metro awarded us 25 million
Oh,
for all the projects that were approved. 5 of those projects are traffic intersections, and all of them have right-of-way acquisition, and Metro will be handling the design phase on our behalf at no charge. But I don't anticipate really us spending on at least construction of those probably for the next 2 years, because design takes a long time, and then the land acquisition adds another year of negotiations and payments. The other 2 remaining projects that we will be starting fairly soon is $700,000 for signalization upgrades, battery backups, new controllers and clocks and things. And another 3.1 million, it's a fiber connectivity project to link signals together on our major traffic corridors and run a line back to the Public Works facility, where we will have a more intelligent, more automated traffic timing program put in place.
Great. So, yeah, another question for Greg. Greg, you want to hire 3 more people for Public Works, and I believe they can do a hell of a job. You know, they're very efficient. They're working very hard. As a matter of fact, I think during this COVID-19 pandemic, nobody's driving. So I think this is the best time to fix our streets, fix our sewer lines. And this is perfect timing for Public Works. But however, I just have a question about this gas tax. I did ask our state controller, you know, what is the real number that we will see, because nobody's driving. So do you expect that we're going to get the same amount of gas tax for 21?
No, we don't expect that at all. Historically, over the last few years, we've been running around 1.1 million. I would guess, just from commuting myself, probably getting about 700,000 next year. I don't know if Julia has an update of a plug number, but I would expect probably a 1/3 hit for a reduction in gas tax revenue.
That's
When I put the budget together, I had used the state's estimates that had come out earlier this year. I checked the other day, and they have not revised those estimates yet, but they will at some point be releasing a new sheet with the numbers of how much they estimate everybody getting next year. So at that time, if it's significantly less, then we will bring it back to council for an adjustment to the budget.
Thank you. So besides gas tax, we did pass a SB1, but I didn't see the revenue for SB1. Do you know how much it is?
I think SB1, I'm not certain, maybe Julia can verify this, but I think it's around 700,000 a year.
You're right.
SB1 funds, they require council adopting a list of streets that will be worked on, and you've already done that, and it's kind of forces us where the projects will be to predict them about a year or two in advance. So that's kind of already been committed and planned out, and we can only use the SB1 on the council approved list of streets. So that's kind of locked up. And historically, well, at least in recent years, council has adopted or selected streets that are in really bad condition, the full remove and replacement streets, the most expensive ones. So it's not a very long list that we can get through with 700,000 a year. But we do try and supplement that with some other funds each year as well.
Right. So yeah, SB1 and also major M, that's 600,000. We all can use for road reconstruction. So, you know, and my question is about the gas tax. I don't know. We can. You know, because SB1 you cannot use for any other purpose. You can use for general fund. So you got to use for transportation related. But for gas tax, can we use it for hiring employees?
Yes, if those employees are committed exclusively to work on qualifying infrastructure like streets, sidewalks, even street trees, and even the equipment. We can buy vehicles like our hot patch truck or the aerial lift truck for trimming trees. If those vehicles or staff are exclusively used for qualifying work, then yes, you can.
Okay. All right. Well, last question. The increase of $86,000 for, let's see, yeah, for animal control. Why is such a big funding for animal control?
Vice Mayor, I'd be happy to answer that. But before I do, just for future years, so you can find it in the budget, we don't list SB1 in our budget as SB1. It was called the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Act. So it's listed as that in our budget. And as Greg said, it's almost $780,000 for this year. As far as the animal control, we are going to bring that back in June for a full presentation to the council and a consideration of a revised contract for the animal control. But in short, the cost to shelter animals has gone up quite a bit. The cost to, unfortunately, euthanize animals has gone up quite a bit for those animals that are sick. And then the cost, the number of animals that are in San Gabriel that are dealt with are up from prior years. So we were told about a month ago from our service provider, the San Gabriel Valley Humane Society, that contract was going to go up to the higher amount, 32 or 33% higher than what it is now. We have been reaching out to other agencies just to make sure that we're looking at all of our options. We got a proposal from the county, which, as I said, we'll go into all of this in more detail in June. But we wanted to know if we had to act very quickly, what our options would be. And the county is about $100,000 higher than what the San Gabriel Valley Humane Society would charge us. So there's no savings there. And then the Pasadena Humane Society has told the 6 or 7 cities that they serve that their costs are going to go up 2, 3, 4, or 5-fold, depending on the city. So we don't have any choice at this point other than to go with the Humane Society. But I'm working with the cities around us, and Armene is helping out in this as well. The city managers are all getting together to talk about what an option could be on a regional basis, whether it's for us who are already customers of the Humane Society to work more closely with Cindy and to try and find ways to raise revenues and to decrease our costs, or whether there are other alternatives that we need to look at on a more regional approach, or even bring it in-house with some sort of a hybrid model where we use our code officers to do some animal control work. And so we'll bring a bigger dive into that in June. But in the meantime, we're sort of held over a barrel because there aren't any other options for any of the cities in the area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Harrington?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a few comments. I know we're going to have our one-on-ones, but I just wanted to some of the additional considerations for the balancing the budget. I don't agree with suspending the membership in the Chamber of Commerce. I think they do a lot of good things for the city. They help drive up attendance when we do have events. They get a lot of sponsors for us. I would say they get more dollars in sponsorship than we give them. And I think if we do that, it's kind of short-sighted, and they're just going to take that sponsorship and give it right into directly to them instead of through the city. So it's kind of like chopping off your nose to spite your face. They helped with Measure SG a lot. They advocated for us in areas that we couldn't as a city. They've helped with the census. I mean, we have a lot of businesses that do a lot of good, and I think it's a great partnership. So I don't agree with suspending the funding for the Chamber of Commerce. I think it's important, especially once we're done with this pandemic. We're going to need a lot of help bringing business back, and that's the worst possible time to not have a private partner helping us, because that's what it is. It's a private-public partnership. I know a lot of us discuss those. I think it's important to have that aspect that they can do things that the city can't. They can reach businesses faster. They have a lot of tentacles that the city we can't take on some of their functions. I also agree with a lot of the public comment regarding the historic preservation ordinance. I don't think we should get rid of that. It's been 3 years. We keep saying we're going to do some work. We keep saying we're going to fund it. We have to find ways to keep that money in the budget. I'm willing to forego any travel, for example. If I have to cut my council budget, I'm fine with that. I would rather see those programs stay. I think we can find money in other places. I mean, right now we've proven we can do a lot of teleworking. I've attended a lot of distance conferences. Now we're doing virtual conferences. I think that might be coming the way of the future. That'll cut down a lot on hotels and other things. We can just get to the actual meat of these things, and hopefully they start to hold these virtually. So I think overall the budget looks good. I'm happy that we're getting very close to getting our ending fund balance to positive territory. That's a very good sign. And I think that'll go a long way as far as the state audit. We're showing that, we're going in the right direction. I think that's a big factor that'll really help with that. And I just think, we're getting, the county just announced today they're going to make the stay-at-home order until August, basically. I think that's not realistic. I think people are going to naturally get back to going out regardless of what the county says. So I think some of our numbers are going to come back faster than some of our projections. So hopefully this is a very conservative budget and we beat all of the revenue. I think we can still tighten the belt in some other places, and I think that's something I'll hold off to the one-on-one, but those are just my general comments for this first presentation. And I just want to thank Julia for the presentation and everyone that helped put the numbers together. So thank you.
And Madam Mayor, if I can just make one quick comment just for clarification. Just in case we didn't make it clear enough, the chamber funding, the historic preservation ordinance funding, and the community events to the tune of $150,000, those are all in the budget right now. We're just putting those up as options for creating additional savings if the council wants to further add to our general fund deficit or reduce that general fund deficit, however you want to say that.
I'm just saying I don't agree that we should even look at those two.
I agree. I hear what you're saying. I just wanted to make it clear that we don't have to do anything with those to balance the budget. It's a matter of if you wanted to add to that. That's all I was trying to clarify.
10-4, 5-5.
Okay. Next, Councilmember Pu.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I'll echo the thanks and commendations for the staff and putting this overview together during a very difficult and uncertain period of time. I do have some specific questions that go back to the staff report that was included in the agenda, and then some overall, but I think one overarching comment and concern is, even though I do know efforts have been made to make this a worst case scenario budget, there are some areas as I look at the line items on the revenue side where I want, you know, I wonder if we might even need to be even more conservative. In other words, you know, part of the reason we have a budget, a general fund deficit at all is because of past overstatements of revenues or overestimates of revenues. So I don't want to, you know, once we've discovered that, we made the corrective actions. You know, I know fiscal responsibility is important to all of us on the council, everybody among the staff, everybody in the community. So we made the adjustments to reduce the spending that has gotten us back into a healthier place. And I don't want to make that same mistake in this period of time when, you know, at the moment, there's still very little economic activity. So there's some of those that I'll just, in this session, I'll just first go over the questions based on the staff report, highlight some of those areas where I'm wondering if we're being too optimistic, and then leave the sort of detailed questions to the one-on-one meeting that staff is having with each of the council members. So first, as far as questions go, so we are reducing the subsidization of the Mission Playhouse to the tune of $433,000. I'm curious then how, when then looking at the expenditures tab or the attachment to the staff report, it doesn't appear to me that the Mission Playhouse budget itself is actually been reduced. In fact, it's been overall increase from 1.2 million, or well, the ending actuals from 1.2 million to 1.264 million. So I'm curious, how is the Mission Playhouse going to balance its own budget just internally?
That's a great question, Councilmember Pu, and the answer is they're not. And that's why we're going to have to bring that back for a further discussion. What we're doing is we're not using general fund money to subsidize that quite so much, but what it will do is it'll end up adding to their deficit at the end of the year, which is a general fund obligation. So what we're basically saying is, let's make sure that we don't transfer as much out so that the general fund itself is as well as possible, but the Mission Playhouse Fund will not be made as whole as possible. But part of our discussion that we'll talk about when we realistically think we can reopen the Mission Playhouse, how much revenue we can receive from that point forward, and then what our expenditures are. Because it also includes a full complement of staffing, not just the 8 of the staff that are there all the time. Not all the time, there are part-timers, but they're pretty much permanent part-timers. But the expenses also include the full expenditures of all of the part-time staff for the ushers and the back of house people, as though there were full productions going on. So every month that we don't have a play, our expenses go down as well as our revenue. So it's not a one-on-one offset, but it will go down. So that my long answer to your short question is it's something we have to look at, but our focus is on the general fund at this point, and then we will come back with that discussion right away.
Will staff be prepared to bring back revenue enhancement options for the Playhouse?
I believe it's going to be less oriented with revenue enhancements and more oriented with how we can reuse the staff that are in the Playhouse and look at other places we can use them throughout the year until the Playhouse opens, and then basically be running the Playhouse on a very, very tight budget until we can start having those plays. We're, and again, we'll go into this deeper, but we have some really great events coming up, not just the ones that you all are used to seeing, But when Elias and his team changed the fee schedule and the way that we have an incentive for having weekday events, and then the way that we have folks paying more for a full weekend event, we have had some groups that have taken advantage of that, particularly the dance contests. And those dance contests have filled up the Playhouse in a very lucrative way for us, and then also have pretty much cleaned the Mission District out of food on those weekends when they've come in. So it's been a really a great boon. So we're going back and forth between saying we're going to close it for a year and knowing that we aren't likely to have events for a while, versus just following the county order and not wanting to cancel those events and have them go book with somebody else in the meantime. And so, again, a very long answer to your short question, but we are not likely to come back with huge revenue enhancements. We're more likely to come back with a way to sort of keep it on life support with those staff members doing other jobs in the city, and then also starting to implement some of the work that the consultant that Rebecca brought on board to try and turn us more into a going concern going forward.
Yeah, and that's what I was referring to, since we had discussed some of those potential other models. I was wondering if we were, if the materials you were planning on bringing forward in June included those or not, but it looks like it's going to still be our own, our own baby to take care of, at least for another fiscal year at a minimum. And not to say to anybody out there in the public listening that we haven't made any decision whatsoever. I just wanted to know if that particular item was something that we're ready to actually we have finished vetting, or if we're still just looking at it as one of our own internal obligations, so to speak. So thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. One question too is there's a statement here that in the staff report that says that the city, this is on page 3, halfway down, or a little bit more than halfway down below the table, where it first says the city is not budgeted for replacement vehicles and major equipment past years. That's not the question part I have a question about. But it says, nor has it contributed to the OPED trust during that time. I wanted to clarify this. It was my understanding that we made our regular payments to the OPEB trust. We just did not make any prepayments to the OPEB trust. Did we not make any payments at all to the OPEB trust in the last couple of years?
We have made our payments to our ongoing obligation. That doesn't go through the trust. That goes directly to PERS to pay those costs. That's not funded like our PERS payments where it's invested. Only the trust portion is invested, and the trust portion is entirely voluntary on a city's part to try and pay down some of those future costs. So we are 100% up to date on all of our obligations to our pay-as-you-go. It's similar to the pay-as-you-go costs for the PERS retirement costs. So for however you want to call that, the pay-as-you-go or our normal costs, we have been making those payments and are 100% on track with those. What we haven't done is any pre-funding over the last 2 years.
Got it. Thank you. Then, as I understand it, there's a number of items that you could receive council comment or direction on. I wanted to clarify one of them about freezing vacant positions for 6 months prior to filling. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear. Doing so would mean that we would put a freeze and not even advertise them for the first 6 months of the fiscal year, and then try to fill them in the latter half of the fiscal year. But really, they would only come on board. We would anticipate them coming on board, say in the 21-22 fiscal year. Is that the idea here? Because with the additional $911,000 savings?
That's exactly right.
Okay. It seems like, the type of thing that we're not, and I appreciate your comments in the middle between Councilmember Harrington and myself here, and for members of the public who might be listening, just to clarify, defunding the historic preservation ordinance is not part of this budget. I mean, that funding is still in the budget. So and I agree and would support that we continue to move forward on that. So that's not at risk. These are all items that would be sort of optional for us to adopt. With respect to suspending community events for a year, back to the hiring freeze, since it doesn't seem to be necessary in order for this budget to be balanced and even to come out on the positive, then I for one would prefer that we move forward and try to fill them again in the latter half of the fiscal year, just so that we do have the budgeted savings of 911,000, but don't have to go too long without having those positions open. As far as suspending community events for a year, I would look at this as not an all or nothing, proposal. We know we can't have our summer night series. We know we can't have some of the things that are going to take us into, through July and August probably. But we might look at, which ones of our community, because the reason I say this is because I think our community events are a point of pride, not only for us as an organization, the council and the staff, but also for the community. And so maybe we could be strategic about it and look at which ones we could still maintain that are in the later part of the year. So like Dia de los Muertos and Fall Fun Festival. I think holiday tree lighting ceremony is certainly something that a lot of people look forward to every year. Can't remember, I think National Night Out is in August or something. That might be too soon, but those are just a few examples. I think Surf's Up doesn't happen till May. We didn't have it this year, but it could still be. I would be willing to bet by May of next year we might be able to have some form of public events and gatherings. Dumplings and Beers in October. It might not be a little bit soon. I don't know. Lunar New Year is in February. So in any case, I don't see it as an all or nothing proposition. We could probably still, we could budget for saving some additional money because we know we're not doing the summer programs, and that could be into the fall. But if we're strategic about which ones we think we're going to be able to do, then we can at least keep some of those events on the calendar and also in the budget. Let's see here.
Can I respond to that real quick, Councilman
Absolutely.
Poop?
Sure.
I would agree with you 100%. The only thing I would say is that you're right, if we kept that budget in place and we looked at what wasn't going to go forward, we could not do those events and we'd just naturally have a savings in that line item because we wouldn't be holding those events. But one of the things we talked about is if we don't need to save the money and we are keeping that whole budget, then Rebecca and her team have ideas for ways to do virtual events. And that money could be repurposed for, we know we're not going to have a 4th of July event, but if we had that funding, could we do something that would be a way to engage the community and sort of bring everybody together virtually? Or for, Surf's Up or our summers movies in the park? Could we do something where we end up trying to get the community together at one time? And so if we don't need the budget savings, we would do some of that stuff that might cost even more than a traditional get together. On the other hand, if we're trying to do the savings, then we would take that out of the budget. But you're right that it's not all or nothing. That's the only thing I would modify.
I kind of like the idea of a community-wide Zoom party to watch a movie or something. So okay, I now that I think about it as well, reducing that budget just for this year may then, I wouldn't want it to jeopardize future years of budget and funding for those events. So you're right. I mean, just keeping it in the budget and not using the money will naturally result in those savings, and then keeps our sort of placeholder there for future years as well for that amount. So maybe that's thanks for mentioning that, because I think that now that I think about it, I think that's a better approach. With respect to the capital improvement program, this is a question for Greg, or questions for Greg. The street improvement allocation of 2.4 million, I'm just wondering, is that enough to even do our regular maintenance or in terms of just maintaining overall PCI?
Maintaining it could. It's it's a complex ranking system throughout all the streets in the city. If you recall, when we had the update on the last PCI presentation, they recommended over 5 million a year to get all our streets up to a good condition. And even then it was a 10-year program. So no, we are deficient in really elevating the streets, and about a third of our streets are in poor condition. And that money is locked up in different ways. So as was brought up earlier, 700,000 of that money is already locked up in a pre-approved list of streets from council, and those are all PCIs of 20 or less. They're very bad streets. And we do intend to do as much as we can. But if you recall last week, I did mention wanting to spend a significant portion of our budget trying to strategize and preserve our moderate streets before they become really bad and become cost prohibitive for us to deal with. So of that money, I'm kind of really rough guesstimating. I won't know till the budget's approved and everything happens. But I'd like to spend about $1 million on a kind of a preservative project for the moderate streets, and the rest of that money, largely SB1, going towards the worst streets, which council already adopted in a list. And then some of that money is gas tax. And so a little bit of that will be also reduced to fund 2 more maintenance workers, which I think I can make more efficient use of by going out ahead of our city, our moderate program with and crack seal the joints or possibly grind the asphalt along the gutter and do some very cost effective work that we would then delete from a bigger contract going out, where they're more profit driven than quality driven and efficiency driven. So it's that 2.4 is pretty thin to divvy up to all those things I have to do with it. So yes, I would say it's not enough to keep us good, but we're trying to be smarter on how we use it.
Absolutely, yeah. I asked the question because maybe 5 years ago, 2.5 million was put out there as a number that could just to sort of maintain the status quo. But I feel like that number just to maintain status quo has crept up somewhat too, and that just maintaining PCI, the level of investment is maybe more like 3 or even north of that per year.
I think a significant component is how we use the money. I mean, quite often we use all our money on the worst streets, and that allows the other 1/3 in the middle to become the worst streets, and then they become unaffordable. So, if we spend all our money on the worst streets forever, our PCI will keep going down. So I'm trying to stop the degradation so we can play catch up in future years.
Absolutely. Yeah, as we discussed, as we discussed last week as well, as part of your presentation, it's like an allocation between, no, you're right. If we just did worst first, there'd be no question, but some amount of being able to address some of the worst streets, and then the bulk of it to the cost-effective maintenance, as we, kind of discussed over several different study sessions, I think is it's at least an approach that will allow us to at some point address those worst streets, even if it takes a couple of years of building up that funding in order to do so. I wanted to ask about that the traffic signal improvements too, because it's also a pretty big chunk of the CIP this year, and it's for this adaptive / traffic responsive signal control. I think you were describing it a little bit when you were responding to Councilman Liao's questions. So is that a system that would be citywide?
Our request to Metro was for Valley Boulevard and San Gabriel Boulevard only, with a little stub out to the Public Works facility. When they actually awarded the money and we started looking at it, and just my pretty much overall desire to be as frugal as possible, I think we can get more than that. So we went to Metro and revised our approved project to include Del Mar and Las Tunas and maybe some of Mission and New. And then what we got Metro, they've accepted our package. It's now being presented to their board next for final approval. But we got the original 2 streets we asked for, and then we got conditional streets where, when we're actually ready to go out and build this project, if we can afford more streets, we've already got pre-approval from Metro to do even more with that money. So they're the commercial corridor streets, and we'll do as many as we can with about $3.1 million.
I'm just writing down some notes here. And how is this different from just synchronization, traffic signal synchronization?
The most basic synchronization is just based on clocks, and we have many in the city that don't even work. But they have to be, all the clocks have to have essentially the exact time down to the second. So it knows, at this time, and 2 minutes later, the next block turns green. And you can do it that way. But now technology has gotten much more sophisticated, where it's monitoring on our behalf 24/7 how many cars are backed up at the queue, the speed going through,
Right.
which lanes have cars waiting to go left. It knows by sensors, by cameras or loops in the street, and even advanced loops, that cars are approaching, leave it green another 10 seconds. And when you analyze all that data at one intersection, the clocks now become useless because it's always changing. So a block away being 2 minutes later might be more appropriate to be a minute and a half later, or delayed because the other block stayed longer. So the software has come an awful long way into analyzing and making traffic flow better from signal to signal. And that's what this project would do. The bulk of the cost would be connecting these signals, typically by a fiber optic line, and upgrading the cabinets to handle the fiber optic communications. But then the other component is it all comes back to a computer in the Public Works facility, where essentially one central brain will monitor everything happening at all these intersections, and then make its best decisions on how to get traffic flow maximized.
Awesome. That sounds great. It's probably just one step away from Skynet or something, some kind of other AI that is going to control all of our lives. No, but no, actually it does sound, so as I understand it, you're saying it can make real-time adjustments based on data it's gathering through sensors in the street. And it's just doing it on its own. It doesn't require programming, that's pre-programmed to be able to take the real-time traffic data into account to make adjustments to the synchronized or to the signals.
Yeah, I think it does require an initial, we purchase the software and it'll have to be installed and set all up to know what to monitor at every intersection. They're all different. Some have left turn protected lanes, some don't. But I also believe that the modern technology in the software is actually a learning software. So it will actually analyze, you're right, it's Skynet for cars. But it will analyze all the time what worked and what didn't, and do little iterative processes to hone in on the most efficient traffic flow we can get through the city.
Okay, that's great. And then does this include the battery backups that you were talking about and things like along those lines?
Metro is funding both, but there's one project they funded for this interconnectivity and kind of a central brain for all these intersections. And they funded separately another $700,000 for the battery backups and upgraded controllers. And we're also, we're considering all the projects we have as a whole, where Metro agreed to reconstruct 5 of our intersections, those will get new signal equipment. So we won't spend our money right there for a new controller when another project 2 years later is going to fund a new controller anyway. So we're trying to really evaluate everything in the city as a whole and spend our money without, any duplication or waste.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much. Last one on these is I think the entire amount of public facility improvements in this budget is for a new space with the police station, something like that. So I'm just curious then, what about maintenance for other public facilities? Like, in other words, I wouldn't have any qualms about trying to create new space for the police department, but then are we shorting the budget to maintain the rest of all of our public facilities?
No, that's not the case at all. The addition to the police station is 100% development impact revenue, specifically allocated for the police station use. It can't be used for anything else. And there's a ballpark of 300,000 in that account already. And as development happens, it slowly grows. But that is, I'm proposing to use that funds for an addition to the police station that we all know they very much have outgrown. I think I can do it very cost effectively with designing and building it with in-house staff for the most part. And separate from that, our facilities maintenance budget is pretty much the same year to year. We haven't reduced it to fund that project.
Okay, got it. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the clarifications. So the last thing I'll just mention are some of those areas which I wonder if we've been conservative enough in terms of revenue. And I would say, like, I think I can recognize there's a line item for sales tax that is as a result of Measure SG, but that number is 2.85 million, pretty close to the 3 million that we were expecting in just under normal circumstances. But my point here is that can we really be that optimistic? Because the overall base is going to be lower, and in terms of spending, it seems to me, and therefore this number here, if the overall base was, let's say, we're 70% of normal, then this number should be 70% less than what we would have expected under normal circumstances.
You're right, Councilman Pu. The detail there is that we talked in originally when we were about a year ago or more, when we were considering a Measure SG. That's what our sales tax was at that time. It would have been approximately 3 million. But right before we hit our COVID downturn, we were expecting Measure SG to bring in more than $3.4 million. So that
wow.
delta is almost $700,000 or even a little more than that. So I think your math works out. Our sales tax revenues were up in our general sales taxes. And we have a company that we pay to track this for us, and they're tracking the new number as well. So we believe we're still being conservative enough, but I think your math is still right.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't realized that the delta or the change to the upside under normal circumstances was even higher than 3 million. So that's good. Some of the other areas revolve around permits and plan checks, also recreation fees. I guess I would hope that we would still have a lot of activity in terms of people who are building additions to their houses or the other projects that are going on in the city that would help drive some of the plan check revenue, the building permits, things like that. But I gotta think that we're looking at a pretty severe decline in a lot of development activity. And then, unfortunately, the same thing is true with recreation or the swimming pool. I think for a good part of the summer, if not even the entire summer. We may not even have any of those programs. So those are the areas where, when I looked at those line items, I thought, I wonder if we're being too optimistic. And that also, I think also holds true then for development impact fees also, right? Since those wouldn't be paid unless those projects really move forward. Let's see here. I think I do want to ask one specific question about risk management. And I'll point out, I'm not exactly sure if this is the correct thing because, and I'll explain why, but on the last page of attachment 1, we're budgeting $2 million for liability charges. Then when you look at the expenditure side on attachment 2, page 2, I guess, of attachment 2, that same number though is listed there for workers' comp. So I don't know if that's just a mix up where those two line items. So I don't know which one is correct, but the question really just goes to the delta between what we're budgeting for this year and last year. Doesn't really even matter whether it's liability or workers' comp. Showing a $500,000 increase in that amount. So I just wanted to understand, is that solely just for Flores, or is there other liabilities that might be baked into that?
Mr. Pooh, if you're referring to the premiums, that does not take into consideration the Flores issue. It's
Okay.
just, those are the premiums that have been calculated and established by the JPIA. And if you look at both premiums for general liability and workers' comp, unfortunately, both went up commensurately by 20%. And that seemed a little bit conspicuous for them to both go up perfectly by 20%, but that has to do with the pooling with the JPIA. And so there's probably been some type of commensurate increase across the board for the entire pool based on increased exposures. I would have to get more clarification from the JPIA as to the exact reasons for the 20% increase, but obviously it's increased exposures and costs.
Okay.
Councilman Pooh, if I can point out one quick thing as an overall to the entire council, to try and make life easier as we work through staff reports, especially when we're not all in the same room. I've asked staff to add page numbers to the staff reports that are consecutive. They count all the way through the attachments. So to make it easier, if you use the big number in the lower right corner, you won't have to worry about talking about attachment 1, page 2, or what have you. That will be going forward. That will be the way we number staff reports to make life easier, especially for those big documents where there are multiple attachments.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. So I'm talking about, page 11 and page 13.
Okay.
With respect to that in particular, but yeah. Again, I'll leave some of the other sort of detailed questions to the one-on-one meeting. I did want to just make sure though that we really take a close look at some of those revenue projections. There are some on the expenditure side too, but overall, I really, just don't want us to have, even though this is a conservative budget, I almost feel like, we need to be prepared for even more conservatism in a way. And it makes it really, really hard for us to plan, of course, but I think it's good that we have, not only does this budget as is provide some cushion, but then there are also other options within it that are on the bottom of page 3, the additional considerations that we kind of talked about a little bit that we could implement should we need to find some additional savings, here and there. So thanks again, and hope everybody's staying safe.
Thank you, Councilmember Pu. Councilmember Dean.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, okay. So, yeah, it's also still, I have question, most of the questions it's they already asking the council member. For the works comp chart, looks like it decreased 15%.
That's correct. We do have a decrease in workers' comp this year. We have a slight increase, not slight, we have an increase in liability, but our workers' comp has gone down.
So because we less claim or? So yeah, from my experience, most of the works comp are going up. So we are saving, so that's a surprise.
It's only because we were too high in the past. So I think ours have gone down, but they've gone down from a terrible place. So they still are probably up from where they should have been, if that makes sense.
Okay.
If you look on that page 11, you can see at one point we were spending almost $6.2 million for combined workers' comp and liability. And that's down now to about $3.7 million. So you can see where we were over the last several years.
So both insurances are from the JPIA, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So the liability that's talking about any issues because maybe someone want to sue the city. That's I understand that's a liability insurance, right?
That's correct. If we get sued because somebody trips and falls on a sidewalk or those kinds of issues, that's where that gets paid out of.
Okay. That's increased a lot. That's JPI already provided the next year rate, right?
That's right. They give us that in May so that we can plan for next year.
Okay. And the page 13, it's for the public works expenditure for the engineering looks like expenses drop a lot compared the current year the budget from 644 and go to the 372.
I'll let Greg answer that with more detail, but part of that is because we are doing some of that work in-house with in-house staff instead of consulting. And part of that is because we're allocating those costs to the funds where those projects are being built out of. Those used to be all funded from general fund, but now if we have capital improvement program projects that have engineering, we are trying to allocate those costs to those programs. And Greg, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
I just want to add to it. So in this current year, we have an obligation to spend about 1.3 million towards gas tax funded work before we even qualify to get gas tax money. So what we've done is we've allocated some of the engineering staff, like part, maybe 30% of their time, because they do work on designing and contract administration for gas tax qualifying projects. So they've been moved to the gas tax MO, or maintenance of effort requirement. Also, I don't know if this is a factor in there, but engineering is pretty small in this city. There's really only really 4 engineering positions, and one has been vacant for almost a year now. And it's partially because of trickle down. So the person who left was kind of at the top, and then someone promoted and created a vacancy, and then someone promoted and created a vacancy. So I don't know if that's part of it, but probably the larger part is moving money to non-general fund.
Okay, sounds good. But for the engineer, the response time, it's then outsourcing.
You know what? We do have some outsourced contracts right now that really are very slow. They're surprisingly slow. I'm not digging in and saying we will not hire consultants. There are appropriate uses where we need more staff power or we need very specialized expertise, or sometimes they can do it cheaper than we can, some things. But there has been a pretty significant change to not relying on consultants for everything. I believe the staff we have that I kind of inherited when I came here, they are talented and skilled to do more than they've been challenged to do in the past. And so even this next street paving program, I'm having our senior engineer do all the plans and specs and put it out to bid in-house, just one person alone. Whereas we typically spend over $200,000 a year just putting together the design package for our street programs. So that's just gone. We're just do it in-house. Being short-staffed, you're right. Timing is an issue because I have them overloaded by greatly increasing what they do and not really growing the staff. It's an issue. I'm not getting projects out as fast as I would like to, but I am getting projects out much more efficiently for a small fraction of what we used to pay consultants to do them. So it's just part of why I'm trying to convey the point of, I can do a lot with in-house staff cheaper and more efficiently than going out and relying on contractors and consultants for everything. And I do believe we're getting better quality because we take it personally. The staff here really does care what they're doing. They care about doing it right. You have a very proud staff in the city, and I'm trying to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I like it, Greg, your idea is appreciated, but I know the people that complain that if we outsourcing, it's so slow. So if we do the in-house, more efficiency, it also save our budget. It's pretty good. Yeah, it's help the city. Yeah.
It does save budget. We can actually, in the end, if I don't pay a consultant $200,000, that's maybe another couple blocks that I can slurry seal or protect and make it last longer. So it's more dollars going out to the infrastructure instead of the consultants. But in regards to the streets, I can certainly keep up with the design and construction maintenance effort in-house as fast as the money comes in. Our weak link in paving streets is not staff, consultants, labor, it's the money. That's our whole weak link. So I can keep up with the money we get. It is deficient for what we really need, but we can keep up with it. So, and I know probably the single biggest complaint, my guess, that comes to council is our streets.
Yes.
And, we're doing what we can, but it's the limited money that slows it down. It's not staff versus consultants being any faster or slower. It's actually the money coming in, controlling what we're able to get done.
Okay. So next budget, just for the paving, they don't have like fixed redo the street. Will you include that budget or not?
The budget has money for street, and it's kind of left vague. There's roughly 2.4 million for a street capital investment in this coming year. Some of that could be design, some of it can be inspection, testing, some of that could be non-construction costs. But the intent is to put every dollar we can efficiently into the infrastructure to grow our overall condition as high as we can get it. It's kind of a puzzle.
Okay. Thank you. And it's same page on this for the community service. Also I saw, oh, sorry, that's for the 2018-19, it's compare, okay. Current year, it's not too much more difference. Okay, sorry, okay, it's fine. And the question is still from the Greg, for the synchronize the traffic light. So you say that our city have their own software to control, or is it controlled by Metro?
As of today, we have a couple signals, not too many, that are monitored by LA County, their traffic department. But after this project, we will buy software. There's a couple vendors that make the software. We'll buy a program. We will be the owner after we buy it, and it'll be implemented and running for us. But we do not have our own traffic control program at all today.
Okay. So our planning is still the next budget, the next years will be purchase that, or for the maybe next couple of years? What's our planning?
Well, okay. For that project, the way it works is Metro has approved roughly 3.1 million for that project.
Mm-hmm.
That one, I feel we can do it without Metro. We can handle that one ourselves. We will bring in a consultant, but I think the overall design of that project is not complicated.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of the work is running fiber optics from intersection to intersection.
Mm-hmm.
So we do ultimately need some biddable plans that we can use and bring in the traffic expertise, someone who has experience with all the programs and the vendors and the materials. And we've already located several people that are qualified for that. So we will contract that out. And the way Metro works with the 710 money is they will approve a project. We will put it out to bid. We'll do a design phase, and then that'll roll into a construction phase where we bid again. But Metro requires the city to front the money. We have to pay for the project, and they reimburse us quarterly. So if that project spends $300,000 design over a 3-month period, we need that money of ours, and then we apply for reimbursement. So that's the way that works. I don't know at this moment the total timeline for that project. I'm going to guess it may stretch into the following fiscal year before we have it all done and kind of signed off and closed and the whole system operating. But I think we can make probably the majority of the project happen next year, or this next fiscal year you're approving now.
Okay, that's good. And I also want to know you mentioned the just Valley, San Gabriel, Delmar too, right? Delmar, Las Tunas.
What was originally applied for, because Metro required all the cities affected by the 710 cancellation to submit potential projects. And we submitted over 20 projects, and they picked out a few that they thought made the most sense. So this project we submitted was only Valley and San Gabriel for the length of the city limits, but only those 2 streets. When they awarded us 3.1 million and I kind of looked at it, I felt we might be able to get more done when we actually go out to bid. Maybe we can afford to do more. So we asked Metro to revise our application to include alternate streets should there be sufficient funds to do more. What is approved right now is just Valley and San Gabriel. That's what we asked for. And then we got approval to do Delmar, Mission, Las Tunas, and possibly New. I don't know how far 3 million is going to go, but I'm hoping we can do more streets than what was initially requested with the money they approved.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mayor.
Let me add one more thing. That is a fiber network, which is the best technology today for super fast data transmission. Signals that are outside of that fiber run or outside of the fiber loop, whatever we are able to install, we can still communicate with them through radios or cheaper communication methods. So we can get intersections that are not on the fiber street still communicating and be integrated into the overall traffic management system of the city. So there's more affordable ways. They're not as fast or as advanced, but we can still do more than just those streets possibly.
Okay. This is for the right now. Also you mentioned the fiber optical. So is they also have planned just in case we have the 5G? It's more faster for the communication. More real.
Yeah, one thing I don't have costs or numbers or anything, or even we don't have designs in place. But ideally, if I could have anything I wanted, I would run 2 conduits and another where we could lease out conduit space to the telecom companies. I don't think Metro would fund that as an option because it's not really related to traffic congestion. But it's definitely a good idea. It's something we definitely should consider as we do this project.
Because I think we investment it should be like have like more new technologies for the long-term plan, Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Greg.
Madam Mayor, may I just ask Greg a follow-up on what
Sure.
Councilman Dean was
Go
saying?
ahead.
So I know you just said, Greg, that you don't have any figures, but would it be possible to develop a sort of an option, or like the cost for an option that simply did put an additional conduit in the ground when this loop is being installed? And would it even be sufficient for the purposes, not necessarily just 5G, but let's even just say our own regular communications?
Yes. I think when we get to a point of having the designer, whoever wins this job, somebody super technically savvy in all these fiber communications with traffic systems, I don't know that we necessarily need a second conduit. We might bore one size up and pull an interduct conduit. Certainly there's a lot of potential for city use, not just for the traffic system, but our own police and fire, citywide communication, the voice over IP phones. But on top of that, there's just so much potential. There could be fiber service provided to our businesses and residents. There could be all the cell carriers, and it's not just 5G. I believe they're still building 4G infrastructure wherever their presence is weak and calls are cut off. The biggest problem with cell phones is we walk around and we all have strong signals. You look at your phone and you have 5 bars and you still have a bad connection when you talk or stream a video. So everyone has very good, strong signals. Their issue in the telecom world is data transmission. We're using more and more data. I mean, right now we're looking at, 18 people on this screen. We're streaming video. Through a cell phone, you have it freezes and we're getting lag. And so there's definitely a movement by telecoms and a strong desire to increase their presence and say, hey, we have the best network. That's what they all keep saying. So if we provide some infrastructure to make their life easy, I'm guessing we can lease it to them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a really great point, because if Metro's already putting some fiber in the ground, then it will definitely be cheaper for us to just piggyback on that and putting our own. I know they won't fund, a separate set of fiber cables just for us to use, but it would be more cost efficient for us to piggyback on that, and also when they're doing the work and not having to go into the streets and things like that again, or just duplicate efforts. So I think it's an interesting idea. I think that I know we're talking all about how tight the budget is and so forth, but it's an interesting idea because it is also something that in other cities provides a competitive advantage from an economic development standpoint. Sometimes from a residential standpoint, you can when you say that that the city's on the sort of leading edge of technology, then it's a place where people want to live and where people want to put their businesses. So I think it's an interesting, there's some interesting potential there. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, can I have just feedback
Yes.
for that?
Sure.
Yeah, because I think we're good with the Metro's funding for this traffic signals, but comes to new technology. If we talk about 5G and others data, you gotta have the telecommunication company to come to our city. They pay us to put a small cell at every street corner or every light post, and they don't pay too much, but that's the future. Because the small cells can detect or can collect all the data, and eventually we're going to have autonomous cars. That's what we need, but not underground fiber optics anymore, because for traffic signal that's good enough, but not for say the future 5G stuff. You've got to have a small cells installed. Thank you.
Okay.
Greg, did you want to respond?
Well, I mean, you're right. The small cells have a short range for the amount of data they're designed to transmit. They only go about a block. So you do need lots of them. And there are 4 major carriers who don't share equipment. So on every block, you need 4 ultimately. And they don't like to co-locate on the same poles either. So it's a lot of headache in building out this system. I wanted to add one thought that Councilmember Pu put in my head. It's when I was with Santa Monica, we would constantly hire a very well-known telecom attorney, and he actually wrote a doctoral thesis on the value of real estate going up in neighborhoods that have better cell service. And it's flat out, especially the young buying generation, they won't buy a house where their phone doesn't work. It's really that black and white. It's pretty bizarre, and they will pay more where it works well. So he did a whole thesis on this. So, for the good of the economy, and all of us want faster, more reliable internet. And so, it's something I know we want. It is obviously a goal and a desirable thing to have. It will be another budget decision on how we can pull this off. I do know offhand that, Beverly Hills 2 years ago put out a project to provide fiber to every property in the city. And they have rural ones up in the hills, and they're getting fiber. So, I mean, they have a different budget situation, but it's definitely something, it's a very valuable public amenity, even to the businesses. They want T1 speeds for everything they do. So you can lure in tech companies if you have better infrastructure for telecom.
I know personally, I've gotten my share of emails from our residents that complain about the lack of fiber or lack of choices, first of all, and the fact that certain rooms don't work and others do. So there is great value that is placed on having that kind of access. For Beverly Hills, did the city pay for it, or did they charge like a parcel tax or something along those lines?
I think it was city funded, and it might be ultimately the city might be the carrier. So maybe you pay monthly revenue to have that fiber service through the city. It might be just a business opportunity. I don't know. I don't remember the details.
Interesting. Councilmember Pu, I think you wanted to add something.
No, I just wanted to clarify one thing. I mean, first a comment, these COVID times remind us how important internet is and only going to become even more important, as we all know. But just a clarification on the small cell technology. My understanding was that those small cells also, they need to be connected into fiber in the ground anyway. Is that not the case?
Ultimately, yes. I believe 3 of the 4 carriers all need a connection to every cell. The one that doesn't, I think, is T-Mobile, and their sites will, or Sprint, I mean, they can have sites that communicate to a central site that
Okay.
connects to fiber. But ultimately, everything to a small cell site does end up on fiber, goes to a central hub, it
Right.
bounces around satellites out in space, but everything needs some kind of landline, typically fiber.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, can I comment, Mayor?
Yeah.
Yes, Councilmember Harrington.
Well, just on that Beverly Hills, they gave a seminar on that at ICA 2 years ago. And it was actually a vendor that comes in and installs it for the city. And it's 1 gigabyte speeds. And it's available to every resident in the city. And then the vendor basically takes the revenue for the first part of it. And it becomes a source of income actually for the city after a while. The city is actually running the service. So after about 5 years, the city starts to see positive revenue from it. And after about 10, they own the whole system. And they just pay maintenance. And it's a vendor that comes in and does everything. Just the city sets it up. If you talk to Beverly Hills, they really love it because it's after a while, it's a revenue source for the city.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah,
Let's see.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I think that, yeah, it's
Councilmember Dane, I saw somebody raise their hand.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Okay, so yeah, it's talking about the vendor. I think from I remember, the Spectrum, they sometimes the promotion they want to provide a free hotspot. So they want to promote their business too. Even coming to my office, they say, hey, if you agree, so maybe we can have a deal with the Spectrum or AT&T or whatever the vendor. Maybe they can provide this kind of hotspot. Maybe help us to don't use the some fiber optical equipment. Just use their wireless one. You know.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are kind of going off tangent a little bit. I mean, this could be its own presentation, Greg, so maybe we can, I still have to I have a few comments before we end.
Okay.
Maybe, Greg, can you just respond real briefly, and maybe we can table this particular conversation because it seems to have hit a chord with many. We can talk
Okay.
about it more. But Greg, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just briefly, you're right. The technology is there. We can upgrade a traffic cabinet to communicate from a cell signal hotspot, work that way too. It is not as fast or as reliable, and it's not what Metro funded. So that may be the technology we adopt to reach the signals that are not on the fiber run. But ideally, you do want fiber is the best, and so much relies on it that I think it makes sense that we invest and go that way, especially since Metro is funding the project. But yeah, you're right. Cell sites can be used for an additional communication link. There is lag in all the data, especially when some of the intersections are using camera technology. So that lag is a bit of a problem in synchronizing everything as efficiently as possible. So, I mean, fiber is pretty much 100% reliable and instant. It's the speed of light and it's just always working. So that's the technology we want, but we may use cell sites to reach the other sites as well.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, and lastly, I'll try to go through my questions. A lot of them have already been asked. Mark, so we will be doing a quarterly review, not a mid-year review, correct? Because I too have some concerns that the revenues in particular, although we're saying it's worst case scenario, but we just don't know what the worst case is anymore. Will we be reviewing these numbers again in September versus 6 months later, so we can respond and react, if the numbers are not coming to fruition?
Absolutely. We will have a first quarter review, which will review the numbers from September. That's also when we go over the numbers for how we closed the prior fiscal year. So that's when we really have a feel for where we ended. But I can tell you that behind the scenes, we will be watching everything monthly. or even more
Good.
frequently than that. But, you know, and if we need to, we can go to council at any time. I will tell you that it isn't until later on in the year when we really do get some numbers that are fruitful, because some of our revenues don't even come in until December. So obviously sales tax, TOT, and some of those that come in more frequently we can watch, but we really don't have a feel for how our year is going to be until we start to get some of those bigger revenue sources.
Well,
But yes, the answer is yes.
okay, great. Yeah, because, for example, we found out today that the stay-at-home orders may be extended until August. And so that would change some of these estimates. And so I just want to make sure we can respond quickly. I don't want to wait mid-year. I think the report said mid-year review. So as long as we all know it's quarterly or even monthly, if something happens, that will change everything. So I do appreciate that.
And Mayor Menchaca, I'm sorry, can I say one thing about the stay-at-home order for the 5 people that are probably watching this at home right now? There was a comment made by Dr. Ferrer at the Board of Supervisors meeting today about the county not opening up until July. And we had notice from Supervisor Barger's office clarifying that. And the notice said that she being Dr. Ferrer was taken a bit out of context. And what she was meaning to say was that we are going to have some form of a stay-at-home order or a health order through July. That is true. But that doesn't mean that we are going back to everybody stay in their houses and no retail open. That means that we will be getting modified orders here in the next few days that will allow us to carefully start to open up to some of those retail establishments with social distancing, with masks, with keeping people, a smaller number of people inside. But it was amazing how quickly that word traveled. All of the news agencies picked it up, and the headline was, "We're all going back into quarantine for 3 months," and that simply isn't the case.
I'll wait to see the fine detail. Because I've heard so many, there've been many programs that have been, shared, unveiled, and you get to the detail and it's not exactly what was explained initially.
True enough.
Yes, and you know that. Also, I wanted to thank staff. I know maybe there's been some confusion, but I think one of the other council members tried to clarify. Page 16 and 17 of the presentation, I appreciate the options, because I think we've talked about this before, that when we do have a budget, to have a menu of options of additional items. So these possibilities, additional items, are not baked into the budget yet. But if we found ourselves in a situation that we needed to, these are some possibilities, and you're trying to get kind of some direction. I want to go through page 16 first. One of the things I would like to mention is that, I don't think this is an all or nothing either. I understand we're freezing these positions for the first 6 months, but as we begin to do our hiring, I was hoping we can prioritize in some way. For example, staffing for economic development, I think, is key, especially, we're doing such a great job right now, but we are just starved with staff in that department. And if we are going to be partners with our businesses, they're going to need assistance. If we really believe in historical preservation, we need a staff of some sort, a point person that they can go to. I mean, Tracy has left, and there is a void there. So I'm hoping that when we get to that point, there is some type of priority that is taking place. It's not all of the positions that are listed here, but there's some type of ranking of sorts. And maybe that's already been done internally. We can't see here. It just says freeze all vacant positions. So I'm hoping there's some plan there with priority to our businesses and priority to our historical preservation group, which is the same group, really. Economic development is historical and business. So that's a key group I don't want to be ignoring, and I want to be able to empower, because I think there's a lot of good work that they're doing right now, and we need to continue.
So I'd be happy to answer that, and it's a 2-part answer. The first part is related to economic development and the historic preservation with specifically the planning manager position. Both of those positions are not included in that list. The economic development manager, we have a person that we have extended an offer and she has accepted. So assuming that she hasn't killed anybody or isn't on any sort of a watch list or it comes up with something in her background, which I'm sure she hasn't, then as soon as we can bring her on board, we will bring her on board, and that'll be happening quickly. The planning manager, we have applications that we're reviewing and we'll be doing interviews here in the next couple of weeks. And if we find a good candidate from that group, then we will bring that person on board right away as well. As far as the other positions go, we feel like there's going to be a natural, not a priority list, but that's how long it will naturally take to fill those positions, because those have traditionally been positions that have been difficult to fill.
Okay, good. The other item, suspend, on page 17, suspend community events. Again, I think we just have to kind of wait and see what's permissible. As you and I learned this morning, Mark, with our conversation with the public health department, there's gatherings don't seem to be a possibility probably till next year or the rest of the year. They're being very prescriptive, I guess, about what that means. And so, but if I really like the idea about having some virtual connections, so thank you, Rebecca, for doing that. I think we all need some type of connection right now. And if it can't be in person, some type of, and as time progresses, maybe a hybrid of some sort. But I think that's an area that we should be looking at really carefully. And if we have to suspend our events to protect the public, then so be it. But again, we just need to kind of monitor that. Suspending the Chamber of Commerce membership for 1 year. The one thing I do want to insist on is that we have an agreement. You know, we've been using public funds and we need an agreement, just like we need an agreement with any other organization, whether it's the San Gabriel Valley Humane Society. We have agreements for everything. We need an agreement. That group should be working closely with our economic development to make sure it complements it. We're not duplicating efforts. You know, our businesses are our priority. And so we need to have very specific goals in the agreements, just like we do with everything else. So that would be my comment for that area. If that's an area that we're going to keep, then we need to have a better, just have specific goals and a working relationship with our economic development team. Well, historical, I appreciate that it was added here, but I think it's unanimous. You know, that's an area that we don't want to compromise, and you know, we want to move forward, especially as the public comments have mentioned. You know, we want access to grants. I mean, that is money down the road. So I would not support that. And as I said before, we shouldn't be touching the OPEB trust in any way. Again, thank you for providing the option, but I know for myself, you know, that's not an option that I want to even consider. I would like to have separate discussions, not only on the Mission Playhouse, but also about a retirement fund. We've talked about that before. Street improvements, clearly, it's always a topic of conversation, but perhaps Greg can come back and give us a little bit more information. I am concerned that we only have 2.4 million being dedicated to street improvements. We were doing so well. That's something maybe down the road, if we can have access to any more Metro funds or any kind of other measures. You know, we need to continue on with the progress we have been making. But again, I know it's limited, but I'm hoping. And our police station, you know, again, I appreciate what Public Works is trying to do, but I'd like to get a status update. Where are we with it? Is that the only thing we can do for now? Is there any other possibilities of trying to inch slowly? I know the chief doesn't, but we're inching, but just moving forward, what else can we do to, have a police station? The wall looks great. Passed by it the other day. Looks really, really good. So great job. And then the Mission Playhouse, is a real concern of mine. It's been encroaching on our general fund for years. And I think last year was about $800,000. Now this year, I know it's geography. We've moved it. It's down below on the special funds area. We have a negative almost 600,000. But someone's going to have to fund that, and it's the general fund. And if you move it up, and if you place it where it should be, which is in the general fund, then we're back to a negative general fund balance. And so we need to have a really, hopefully, a conversation, a discussion real quick. How are we going to cover that general fund balance? Because it really is a general fund balance. For now, I understand the reasons, we're kind of delaying it, but there's no one else that can cover it. It has to be general fund money. So we either move it now and try to have some other cuts, or we leave it as is so we can have at least a balanced budget, but have a conversation sooner than later about the Mission Playhouse. What direction are we going to take? We did hire someone to do an analysis to help hopefully guide us how we can make it at least break even. I'm not even at the point of trying to make a profit, just break even so it's not taking from our general fund. But that hasn't been addressed here. And I know we keep saying we're going to have a presentation, but I like to have it sooner than later, because that's the area that is of great concern to me, because we're not going to be able to open it up probably till, I think it'll be closed probably till the end of the year. I can't see it open up any sooner than that. And we do have staff that I'd like to try to protect and keep. We have very good staff. And I know there's possibilities of them, I think the word was repurposed in other areas, and that's wonderful. But we need to have a serious discussion about the Mission Playhouse. It's a jewel, but it's a jewel that's taking $800,000 of our general fund every year. So we need to polish it up and make it just at least break even. At least break even. Let's see. Did you have any comments, Mark? I see your head shaking, but I think I'm not saying anything that you don't know.
No, and I will tell you that Julia is putting together a 5-year forecast that you'll see as part of our budget presentations. And you'll see the retirement fund, what that looks like. And we can have a deeper discussion on that in the future. But you'll see with our PERS projections what that will look like over 5 years. You'll see what our general fund balance will look like with some, probably not too reliable projections because of what we don't know about COVID, but we'll do as good of a job as we can. And you'll see there that there isn't, unfortunately, funding for the police station for the foreseeable future until those numbers start to change, other than a tax measure. And there's no appetite, as far as I know, from the public for anything like that anytime soon. So, but we'll show you what that looks like. And maybe there's a spot on that graph when we can start looking at adding in extra funds for those kinds of things.
So these kinds of things that I listed, and I'm sure my colleagues probably have other areas maybe they're interested in. Is this something that we're looking at in the next 3 months at the special meeting like we had tonight for the budget? Or because what I've noticed is since I've been on board, which is almost 3 years, I guess, our budget meetings are less now because you are now spending, individual council members are now meeting with the executive team, and we're kind of going through it, drilling down more, which I think is much more productive than we had in the past 6, 7 different meetings. So I think there's some room there now that we can have some presentations, as opposed to just having these, mass meetings to go through the budgets. So I appreciate that too, kind of reducing next steps, a lot less days for us to have, or public meetings that we have to spend. So when do you predict that the staff could be ready to have a real deeper discussion about retirement, street improvements, Mission Playhouse, police station, and any other agenda items that my colleagues would like to see?
Those would be perfect for summertime. We can start to put those on the agenda as we have time. But I'll tell you what my priority and how I intend to get the council to come together and decide what our priorities are is we are due for an update to our strategic plan. It runs out this year and we haven't really been using it effectively over the last year and a half because the funding just hasn't been there to do anything more than keep us, afloat for the last year and a half. And so if we end up adopting the budget as it's presented today with whatever minor tweaks we make over the next couple of meetings, included in that, and Julia pointed it out in her presentation, is money for a strategic plan, facilitator, consultant, whatever you want to call it. And I would suggest that we start a process where we all get together, the council and the executive team, and have a facilitated discussion on what those priorities are. We can have meetings ahead of time to sort of prime the pump for information and have a baseline of what I'll call them assumptions are going to be for what our financial future looks like. And then we can have that facilitated discussion to come up with what our priorities are. And then we can come out with a document that hopefully will guide us when we're out of the coronavirus state that we're in and our revenues are looking healthy. We'll have a roadmap for how we want to start putting the priorities on those projects when we have extra money to spend. So we don't just go year by year by year and get used to our new revenue levels and end up looking back in a few years with nothing really to show for it other than hopefully a healthier general fund balance. So that would be my suggestion. We'll have some of those meetings, but then also have a deeper discussion as part of our strategic plan process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Okay, so at this time, so this report will be filed. Is there anything else you need from us, Mark?
We don't. This is the first step. And as you said, we'll go through meetings with council and the public again. And at that time, we'll be looking for formal direction.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for, hanging in there. It was a long meeting. We have another one next week. So before I adjourn, the next regular city council meeting will be held on Tuesday, May 19th, 2020 at 6:30. Have a great evening, everyone. Meeting adjourned.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, folks.
Thank you.
Good night.